You know, this is one of the most tragic deaths in NHL history. Didn't occur on the ice, but occurred off the ice. Now, we did a previous podcast that looked at some of the bare bones or a breakdown of the John Kordic situation, his great life in hockey, his downward spiral, and his death after an overdose in a Quebec hotel room. But he was much more than a cautionary tale, much more than the enforcer he was. I don't consider John Kordic a goon. I consider John Kordic a dedicated and talented player who felt all he had to do was fight to survive. And I don't know if he made the wrong choices or the people that were running his career or coaching his career made the wrong choices, but it was a perfect storm. He should be alive today in 2021, coaching someplace or being a scout or being a person to be given back to hockey. His death was a complete and utter tragedy. Now today what we're going to be talking about mostly is some of the background which led him to probably one of the most successful two-year runs in Montreal Canadian alumni history, where he won a Memorial Cup, a Calder Cup, and a Stanley Cup within literally 3 years. Now, born in Edmonton, Alberta, before breaking in with the WHL in Portland, he played with the Alberta AA squad in his hometown. With 23 goals and 41 assists for 64 points. Now, played mostly defense, 6'2", 190, but more than that, rugged on the ice. Now, with the Portland Winterhawks at the WHL in '83, he had 25 points in 72 games, including 235 minutes and penalties. Now, he really shone in the Memorial Cup that year. Portland, one of the better major junior teams of the 1980s. Now, Montreal was looking to rejig his team to have, rugged defensemen or rugged forwards to protect their key players. Because remember that Guy Lafleur, Matt Slasson, and a few others were getting roughed up on the road. Now, he eventually made the NHL, but it was kind of an indirect route. He decided to go back to Portland for the '85 season, but also played that year with the Seattle Breakers, also of the WHL. That season, he had 71 games, 23 points in Major Junior, 23 goals, 58 assists for 81 points. Now, he also played 4 games with Sherbrooke that year, of course, the great Sherbrooke team that eventually won a Calder Cup in '85. Now, he was back with Sherbrooke for the '86 season, but was eventually called up to Montreal, where he became an overnight sensation. He only played 5 games in the regular season, but in the playoffs, where Montreal went onto an improbable run, beating Boston and Hartford in their own division, and then going on beating the Rangers and Calgary in the next 2 rounds. And of course, the big turning point was his fight against Jay Miller in the Boston series, where he basically overshadowed Miller, and Miller was so frustrated when he went on the ice, he turned back and kicked the door and fell down in front of about 4 million Hockey Night in Canada viewers. Now, situation with Kordic again was very complicated. He was called upon to basically fight when needed, especially after the '86 season. Now, he was in the top echelon of the NHL after the '86 campaign, but it was pretty well downhill from there. Now, he was eventually traded to Toronto, but in Montreal, he played on the line with Brian Scrugglin and Mike McPhee in '86, and of course, playing on Scrugglin and McPhee's line, they did a lot in the playoffs as a defensive pairing. Now, he had some difficulty with Montreal, and was eventually traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs for Rush Courtnall in the late 1980s. Now, with Toronto, this is where he got in a major problem in Montreal and Toronto in the '88 campaign. He was suspended by the NHL for 5 games and fined $100 for fighting Gord Donnelly prior to Montreal's February 23rd '88 game versus Quebec. Now, Kordic had been feuding with Donnelly for a few days, dating back to a February 2088 game at Montreal, when the players fought as soon as the puck was dropped. When he lined up for the opening face-off on February 23rd, they didn't even wait that long. Kordic and Donnelly were ejected and fined $100, while both teams received $25,000 fines. Now, on February 25th, '88, the NHL held a hearing for Donnelly and Quebec coach Ron Lapointe. At the hearing, NHL Vice President Brian O'Neill suspended Donnelly for 5 games and fined LaPointe $1,000. Now, Kordic and Montreal coach Jean Perron were given the same punishment after a hearing with O'Neill on February 26, 88. As a result of the suspension, Kordic missed Montreal's games from February 27, 88 through March 9th. Now, errors in his personal life continued soon after. He had bruised his left ankle when he crashed his $54,000 Corvette into another car in downtown Toronto on November 20, 89, but did miss any games. Again, tabloid fodder. He was eventually suspended for 1 game by the NHL, an automatic suspension, during the 1990 season for receiving his 3rd game misconduct of the year during Toronto's November 23, 89 game at Boston. He was eventually suspended 2 games by the NHL, which were automatic, and fined $500 for attacking, of all people, Mike Modano during Toronto's January 24, 1990 game versus Minnesota. Following the game, Kordic told reporters he had been looking to give Modano payback for previous hits on Toronto players. The league therefore determined after a January 31st hearing that Kordic's attack was premeditated and required an extra 2-game suspension, bringing the tally to 4 games. The second suspension was announced on February 2, 1990, and the Maple Leafs appealed for a 7-day grace period. He served the suspension by sitting out the week of February 9th. Now, led Toronto in penalty minutes in 1990. Eventually found himself out of Toronto, and he hired agent Howard Gorwitz in December 1990 when it appeared he might not be able to resume his NHL career due to his negative reputation. Now, Gorwitz brokered a trade that enabled Kordic to resume playing in Washington, but of course the same problems followed him. There was rumors of all kind of different stuff, womanizing, drinking, drugs, steroids. Not for me to say, but like I said, the talent was there, but he felt again pressured to be the enforcer or goon that the team wanted for that squad. He had said that to members of his family several times. Now, Washington tried to intervene by asking him to spend 8 days in a rehab center after he missed a practice in early February 91. He was eventually suspended indefinitely without pay by Washington on March 2, 91 after failing to show up for a game for the Islanders. Capitals coach Terry Murray determined that Kordic had a big-time problem and did not belong in the team at a time when he desperately needed help for his alcoholism. The suspension ended Kordic's 1991 season. He eventually signed with Quebec as an unrestricted free agent on October 4, 91, and he eventually found himself in the minors, but he was trying to come back with Edmonton, but we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, another thing that overshadowed him was a bizarre feud he had with his former coach, Pat Burns. Now, after leaving Montreal in November 1988, Kordic landed in a controversy with his former head boss. The dispute stemmed from a December 22nd, 88 Boston Globe story in which Burns was quoted as saying that Kordic was a problem. Burns allegedly claimed Kordic had threatened to slap former Canadiens coach Perron if he did not get more ice time. Burns backed off the comments about Perron after Kordic admitted to a long-term dispute with the ex-coach, but it is said there was never any sort of physical threat involved. Burns continued to claim that Kordic had used the same intimidation tactics on him after he took over the team, and Burns said he once threw an ashtray at Kordic out of fear that Kordic was coming to the office to attack him. Kordic denied the ashtray incident had ever happened. Now, in the 89 season, this was another major suspension when he broke Keith Acton's nose with a cross-check during Toronto's December 14, 88 game versus Edmonton. He got 10 games for this. The incident happened just 22 seconds into the third period when Kordic chased Acton across the ice and then cross-checked him in the face in an angry reaction to being slashed. Kordic initially received an automatic 2-game suspension, subject to league review, because it was his third stick-related major of the season. Now, NHL Vice President Brian O'Neill later reviewed the incident and conducted a hearing at league offices on December 21, 88. After the hearing, O'Neill officially extended Kordic's suspension to 10 games, forcing Kordic to miss Toronto contests between December 21st and January 11th. Now, he was playing in 3 of the biggest media centers in the NHL: Montreal, Toronto, Washington. Is he the first person to have on-ice and off-ice problems? No. But with John Kordic, so much was expected of him because the fans loved him. Yeah, he was a folk hero. And again, winning that cup in '86, those Montreal players were getting beaten up on a regular basis. You look back in '84, the cross-check of Trotty on Gainey, and when Kordic arrived, it was like a breath of fresh air. I don't think Montreal would have won the cup without Kordic in '86. So when the bad times were still happening, Montreal, Toronto, Washington, even Quebec didn't do enough or step in enough to save him from himself, because he was just, everything he was doing on and off the ice, to me, was a cry for help. But this is where the negativity came to a fore. Now, throughout his NHL career, his battle with alcoholism was no secret. For me, I knew he had a problem with drinking, but it wasn't me to say it because I wasn't a beat reporter for the NHL at the time. Now, according to published reports, it led to multiple trips to rehab centers, multiple suspensions by his NHL teams, and a reputation of one of the biggest problem players in the entire association. Now, Kordic's coaches and teammates often accused him of being so selfish that he never worried about team concerns, and toward the end of his career, he was sent home for the minor leagues because he said to be infecting young players with his bad attitude. Now, at the time, the NHL was getting away from the goon enforcer mentality, but in 1990, skills were taking over, and for a lot of people, there was no room for Kordic. Nevertheless, to me and to many people, it was a shock and a tragedy when Kordic's addiction finally brought about his death at age 27 in August '92. In the 2 weeks before his life ended, Kordic knew he was in danger of drinking himself to death. In late July '92, he phoned James Fearing, his Minneapolis-based addiction counselor, and asked Fearing to visit him in Quebec City while he was preparing for a training camp tryout with Edmonton. While working out with his friend Tony Twist, Kordic began to worry that he was falling off the wagon, and he told Fearing that despite all his efforts, he did not think he would defeat his addiction. Now, Fearing agreed to come to Quebec in mid-August '92, but that would prove to be too late. On August 8th, Kordic died from heart failure and a buildup of fluid in his lungs. Doctors said the condition resulted from Kordic's mixing alcohol, drugs, and steroids during his training. On the final night of his life, Kordic was staying in a motel in the Quebec suburb of La Chalette. He had checked into the hotel earlier that day with bruises all over his body and blood in his hands. He was also short of breath, according to the hotel manager. At 9 p.m., a distressed Kordic called the front desk, slurring his words as he tried to get someone to call his fiancée, Nancy Massey, a local stripper who Kordic had been charged with assaulting on July 16, '92, leading to a schedule of a prelim court hearing on August 11th of '92. The hotel manager could not reach Massey, so she sent her brother to Kordic's room to see if he needed help. When a man reached Kordic's room, Kordic was in a rage and had already trashed his room. He then violently accused the man of planting drugs on him. The man called police, who reached the motel just after 10 p.m. Now, 2 local officers and 7 provincial officers entered the room to try to restrain Kordic, but he wrestled several of them to the ground and punched all others who came at him. The 9 officers finally pinned Kordic to the ground, handcuffed him, and took him to a hospital. Kordic eventually lost consciousness on the ambulance and eventually died. The coroner later suggested Kordic may have lived if medics had administered oxygen earlier in the process. Although his final irrational rage was likely related to his steroid usage, it was clear that Kordic's body had given out after years of alcohol and drug abuse. Now, Kordic was eventually buried in Edmonton on August 13, '92, and in the wake of his death, it was reported that he had a long-term cocaine addiction and was also known for using steroids throughout his career. Now, a recount of Kordic's entire life was later the subject of a '95 book by Mark Zolowinski titled The John Kordic Story, The Fight of His Life. The book's film's rights were eventually sold to a Canadian production company, but plans to make a movie by Canadian director Bruce McDonald have never come to pass. Now, the idea that Kordic was the only person in the goon enforcer era that had issues. He was not the only one. But again, the affection that we in the media and the fans had for him. But maybe the man-child approach, his own worst enemy, is more detailed in our original podcast and also in that infamous SI article which talks about the death of a goon. Now, the pictures show that Kordic was a great physical specimen. If Bob Probert is another example, Joe Murphy, a few others. to take the hits to the head, the punches to the head, allegedly the steroids and alcohol and drugs all in the mix, and live fast, die young. Personally, like I said, in 1986, this is not like 2021. Kordic would have got a lot of help. People would have stepped in. You look at Jordan Tutu and a lot of players that had issues through the years. But for me, John Kordic had $1 million talent. He would have been a good number 5 defenseman for years. But like I said, when you're a bad example to your teammates in Major League Hockey, and allegedly a bad, influence on young teammates in minor hockey, to meet John Kordic, according to people I talked to, when he was sober, he was the nicest guy in the world. He would sign autographs, he's good with the people. But when he got into his addictions and he had issues, it wasn't the same person. So, when he died, I don't believe in conspiracies. I don't believe the cops can't know everything what's going on in a person's situation. Is he the first person to die while in police custody? You look at the unfortunately the black people have died, have been murdered in the States. When you're dealing with an individual, especially a big man like this, a good athlete, strong, Kordic, one of the strongest players in the ice. I used to watch him play. He could turn up his game. He could have been an offensive defenseman. He could have been a 10 to 20 goal a season person. But all I know is that if I would have known, I was only a young journalist at the time, if I would have known that John Kordic, that carried the Stanley Cup around the rink in '86 and was celebrating, would die within 6 years, mainly because of maybe what the pressure he felt he was under, pressure other people put on him, I would never think that in a million years. The Stanley Cup gives your career energy. A lot of people win the Stanley Cup for the first time, go on for another 5 or 6 years where they should have been retired. Or in the case of the Montreal Canadiens this year, some of the older players are going to give it one more shot. Perry and a few others, Stahl. But I miss John Kordic. That's why I'm doing this podcast. There's not a day goes by that I don't take in the Montreal Canadiens of that 86 and 93 team and not believe that, like, John Kordic not around is a sad story about what the NHL was like in that last, what they call era where we didn't protect the players. It was catch as catch can. The goon mentality of the 70s was still around with the vestiges, right? But John Kordic knew what he had to do, and he felt by doing steroids and being on all the time, it would keep his job. And the thing is, with enforcers, usually they last no more than 3 or 4 years because other enforcers are there to take their place. But all I know is this. A lot of Montreal fans, a lot of members of the media, especially I was a young media member back then. I think I was 27 when he's passed away. I'm 56 now. Like I said, I wish John Kordic was still around, because if he would have cleaned up his demons, he would have been a role model to a lot of people, and he would always point to the '86 playoffs. No matter what your role is, he knew what his role was, but he could have been an enforcer and a good player. He just to develop his skills. And like when Montreal lost to Boston, I think it was '88. Kordic could score. Kordic, when he turned up his offensive game, he could score. But the wrong coaches at the wrong time and the wrong people and wrong atmosphere. Montreal was bad with the media coverage. Toronto was even worse. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's just a little bit of story of John Kordic. You could do 400 podcasts of John Kordic. It's just another taste of what my opinions are of a player that I feel was one of the main reasons that the Montreal Canadiens became the Montreal Canadiens again. '84, we were knocking the door, but John Kordic busted it down. And when I'm having a bad day, I look at what he did in Jay Miller in the '86 playoffs, seeing Miller kick the door and fall down, and I said, the right guy. And my biggest regret in life, I never met him and said thank you. Anyway, that's just me. Anyway, that's just part of the life and legend of John Kordic. Thanks for listening. Bye.